Hello, everyone. This is the Trillionaire meeting. I'm here in Oakland right now. We have Mr. Frans Absil out in the Netherlands and everything. Frans Absil is a musician, producer, composer, arranger, and most recently an educator. He studied arrangement courses at the Royal Music Conservatory in Hague, the Netherlands. He has a master's degree in aerospace engineering and a PhD in science. Yeah, happy to have you here. Hey, cheers. How's it going
Thank
today?
you. Thank you for having me.
hmm pretty cool. What's going on in the Netherlands right now? It's 10 p.m. over there.
It's 10 p.m., that's correct, and we had 2 weeks of torrential rain.
Okay.
It's supposed to be mid of summer, but I think on your continent you're also having a lots of weather extremes these
Yeah,
2 months, I believe.
it's pretty hot over here.
Yeah, but there was also lots of flooding, but that might have been the San Francisco area last
Oh
week or two
yeah.
weeks ago.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there was a
I
ton of
remember
floods in
well.
San Francisco and the Bay Area. It was a crazy time.
Yeah.
Definitely was. Pretty cool. Yeah, today how I came across your work and everything, I was turned on to the Schillinger system of musical composition by a mentor of mine, Mr. Daryl Mishak. And at the time, it was a little tough to understand, and I got through it pretty quickly. And I was sidelined by chapter 8, so I surfed the internet, to see if anyone else was, having any other issues like that. And that's when I came across your work
And
on
it's
the internet.
chapter 8 from book 1, The Theory of Rhythm, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
So
because there are
actually,
many chapters 8 in the Schillinger books, but it's the book 1, The Theory of Rhythm.
theory of
And
rhythm.
the chapters 7 and 8 from that book are infamous stumbling blocks because it's not very well written, the original 2 volumes in that respect.
hmm
But sorry, I interrupted there. So
Oh no,
continue.
yeah, they were yeah, pretty interesting, and I appreciate you for helping me with the finding the mistakes and things like that in the book. How did you get started with the Schillinger system, and how did you come across it?
Well, you reversed my professional career. I studied the engineering first.
hmm
Um, I've been playing music all my life, but that was wind instruments, and particularly from the Renaissance and medieval period. It was only when I was a student in my 20s that I started. Well, I got interested in jazz. I wanted to switch to saxophone, and I had an excellent saxophone teacher. And he suggested to me, if you want to study arranging seriously, which I did at the time, and by the way, it was very hard to get books on arranging in those years. There
hmm
was only one guy in the Netherlands, North Holland, who imported books directly from the United States. And that's where I ordered all those books and I studied those books independently. But then my saxophone teacher suggested, why don't you try and apply for a part-time study at the Royal Netherlands Conservatory of Music in The Hague? And there, that was allowed. I was allowed to enter the class. And there was a piano player, also a jazz arranger, who did more or less classical big band, jazz big band arranging, the techniques that apply to that idiom, like sectional harmony, tutti writing, ensemble block writing, etc. But I kept asking for more and more and more. So at some point he suggested to me, well, if you're really interested, and I know you have a scientific background, why don't you study the Schillinger? By the way, I pronounce it the German Russian way, I suppose, Schillinger. I know that in the US you always say Schillinger. Um, he said, well, why don't you get the Schillinger books and start reading those? And that's what I did. And I got fascinated by what was written there. So I spent hours and hours. And it was also at the same time when there was the first Atari with the MIDI interface. And I had a Yamaha DX synthesizer and a Roland synthesizer. That was before sampling and sample libraries, but at least I had the tools to enter all the examples from the Schillinger book. That's what I did. Entered all those examples as MIDI patterns. And listen, learn, listen, learn. What's written there? Do I? Yes, yes. So that's how I more or less mastered myself the two books.
Hmm. Yeah, it's really cool. The first thing I noticed about it was that the numbers when you find the resultants that they're palindromic, like it's the same way forward as it is backwards. It's very interesting.
Yeah, but do you appreciate that aspect?
Yeah, totally.
You
It's so
do?
cool.
Oh, because I know that his methods for generating rhythms, because he's trying to explain certain families of rhythms and the evolution of rhythm over time, and
Hmm.
more or less presenting it, since it has according to him, it has a scientific basis. It's inevitable that rhythms will go this way if you start in family A and go that way in a different family. Um, but all the mechanisms he describes in this book, well, not all, but the opening chapters, which are about rhythm generation, always generate symmetric patterns.
Hmm.
They, you could, they can be mirrored in time, um, and that's an aspect I don't use myself because I don't think it's a natural way of using rhythm. Because his patterns always have this start with the longest duration, then they start to mix longer and shorter durations, and in the center of the pattern, there's always a set of short durations.
Hmm.
But then, of course, as you said, it's the reverse. So you end with very long notes. There's not too many classical and good music phrases that would end with a mirrored rhythm. So usually what you should do is use the techniques from later chapters and cut up the rhythms at certain points and use fragments and start to permutate and combine those.
Hmm.
So I know what the result is when you do the theoretical work, but I don't think that's one of the aspects of the Schillinger system, which, by the way, since the books were not written, as you must know, not written by himself, but it was his students who more or less wrote down a kind of legacy, there might be aspects that were in his lectures or in his lessons that never ended up in the book, and I think there's something missing there.
Hmm.
So I suggest, I have some online students, and I suggest don't use those rhythms exactly as they are generated in the first chapters. Do something with them, then apply them.
For sure. So what was the overall use for them? Was it to I know not generate ideas, but was it to stimulate, like stimulate creativity?
Yes, it certainly did. Because as I said, I was studying classical music, harmony, counterpoint, etc., mostly from books. Um, I never had a formal full-time school of music education, so I felt very limited in the idioms I could write. I had a fairly good background as a jazz arranger. I conducted and big bands and wind orchestras. I was also a saxophone section player, but it was mostly popular or jazz music. And I was so inspired. Yeah, my favorite composers are Bartok and Ravel.
Okay.
And I was always, how do you write music like that? Of course, later I also found books about which do careful, very detailed analysis of Bela Bartok's music. But this is before that time. And I was, how do you, what techniques could one use to create that type of idiom? And in that sense, the enormous set of techniques in the Schillinger books were of great help, because usually um, he takes it's about a specific technique or aspect, and what he does then is generalize these approaches, so you get numerous options. And of course, well, mostly one gets overwhelmed. Otherwise, because it has pages of possibilities, all these combinations and permutations.
Yeah.
These days, you would do that in a computer, let the computer generate all these patterns, write them out as music notation, whatever. But he did it written out in his book, but you get overwhelmed by the number of options. And that's the generalization phase. And then you have to filter for yourself, oh, I'm going to use a subset of these options, or I'm going to try this, or I like this one, or I will disregard that one. And then you start to work with that. And I, 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 I still remember the moments of excitement when I more or less strictly applied a combination of two or three of his techniques, wrote 32 bars of music for orchestra, which of course with two synthesizers you can never fully reproduce in those days before the good sample libraries. But I didn't check in the meantime. I entered all the I wrote a draft on paper, entered everything in the Atari computer, and then listened to the end result. And I was so excited, man! Now I can write music without having to work my way through measure at the piano. That there is an overall design principle here that one can use. So that's where it became useful, and of course that inspired me to study more and more of the book and try and experiment, write music with it.
Yeah, that's super cool. So you've done both. You've went to school and had a structured school curriculum, and it sounds like you also did independent studies. So as an independent studier, you get all the books and everything, and how do you structure and organize your information for studying by yourself?
Okay, well, not that, of course, not everything I did independently. I have an engineering. Underwent. I completed an engineering curriculum at Delft University of Technology.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that means good professors, inspiring environment, lots of smart people. And of course, a university is supposed to present a structured curriculum by itself. As a student, first first year, you probably don't realize that there is a 5-year design behind it, but that's the case. So that's not all independent. In music, I think I'm not so well these days. I guess lots of colleges of music also have very structured curricula, but at that time it was more or less, you know, the, what the conservatory did was in the jazz department, because I was in the jazz department, was hire excellent musicians and uh, have them give a course. But those people were so busy, busy playing and doing other things that they came for one day to teach one class. So the coherence is not too obvious. So there, um, yeah, and that field it was more independent. I had all the harmony books by Piston and Schoenberg. I read those, but they didn't make sense to me until after I studied Schillinger
Mm-hmm.
and after I entered all these examples in the Atari computer, which I then also did with the Schoenberg books, with the Piston book, etc. And that's when I started to integrate the knowledge and also find the analogies, because Schillinger has this, which is terrifying to some students. It's full of this symbolic and not it's mathematical notation, yeah, but
Mm-hmm.
it wouldn't pass a rigorous test for a mathematical journal, I guess. Um, but that's terrifying to students. Um, but in the integration step, combining that with what I read in scores, what I read in other books, and what I did on the computer by listening to it, it started to make sense and become a coherent thing. And I've always been looking for overlap, looking for analogies between what Schillinger wrote and what other people did. And
Yeah,
it
that's
helps me because you wanted to know how I study scores, for example. Well, when I take a score, it's mostly symphonic scores, but it could be string quartets, occasionally piano sonatas, etc.
mm-hmm.
But in an orchestral score, and that's a lot of puzzling work, I do a harmonic analysis from beginning to start. That's what I did for lots of classical music masterworks, which in my case, they are full of pencil annotations. Later, I also bundled those. I have an ebook on musical analysis where I put everything into tables and into diagrams with a structured analysis of those pieces. But I started with a harmonic analysis,
Mm-hmm.
and that I already do in with the notation from the Schillinger books, because that gives me immediately insight into, hey, is this conventional, cadential closing, or is something particular happening here? When I listen to the music, there is tension rising here. Can I explain it from the harmonic development, from the chord progressions that are there? And I always can check then. Oh, yeah, I see it. In Schillinger terms, that would imply negative root cycles, etc., or chord extensions, higher chordal functions, etc. So I start with the harmonic analysis. Then I do always a formal analysis, like where are the main sections in a movement from a symphonic work,
Mm-hmm.
and then within those sections I'm looking for what are the melodies here, where's main motifs, is there counterpoint, is there imitation, how does the composer process, reuse this, and then again I can interpret that in Schillinger terminology, like, is it a permutation? Is it a modification where the composer puts several permutations in order? Or is it growing in length or diminishing, speeding up, rhythmical diminution or augmentation? And then finally, I look at the orchestration. Do I understand the voicings? Ravel is a master in that field.
Mm-hmm.
So I always put in my score, there is chordal functions in every voice of an orchestral score. So I know where he puts the roots. And I'm trying to understand, why is the root doubled or is it not? Where are the characteristic chordal functions 3 and 7? Are they in each section, or is there only one part responsible for coloring? Well, that's
Yeah.
how I approach classical music scores, with the Schillinger, but also other books, as background knowledge.
Okay. So for instance, you said chord voicing. So say you have just for easy notation, say you have a C chord, a C E G. How would you how would you spread that over an orchestra?
Well, go to the opening of Wagner's Rheingold opera from the Ring des Nibelungen. You know the piece?
I'm not familiar.
Okay,
No.
well, the opening of the Rheingold is, I think, where there is this lady, the goddesses of the Rhine, and they are brewing something, which is the start of the Ring des Nibelungen, and it's for 4 minutes. I think it's E flat major triad, nothing more than that, and it goes on for 3 to 5 minutes. And Wagner puts it in all sections of the orchestra with different instrumental forms as sustained harmony. Then there's more and more movement. So don't ask me. Go go to your Wagner, or Daphnis et Chloe. The second suite opens with, I forgot the title, but it's the opening of the second suite, which is the building up of an extended chord, and it starts with open fifths, 1/5, 1/5, and again some static parts and some arpeggio parts. Adds 3, adds the major 7, because it will be an extended major chord, so that's the major 7 entering, and then then it's the major 9, which is more or less a consonant interval, but then of course the next higher chordal function will be the sharp 11, which is such a characteristic. Well, of course, that's become a standard trick in Hollywood music these days. All these melodies in Lydian mode, which overuse this sharp 11 because it's characteristic for that mode. But that's also happening in the Ravel piece. And then as soon as in the harmony, the sharp 11 enters, and of course, Ravel does it so balanced that that you ask me how would you voice that? Well, of course, the natural voicing, a stable voicing, where the natural balance would be to have the higher chordal functions in upper parts, in upper voices. Don't put all your sevens, nines, and 11s in the trombones,
Mm-hmm.
because then you get unbalanced voicing. And for instance, that's what Ravel is doing in that piece, in that that section from the Daphnis et Chloe second suite.
He had the sharp 11s in trombones.
Uh, One does it. One does it. If you write jazz music or sectional harmony, yeah, you would find, and if you would do a 3 or 4 part line in the trombones, you could use it there. But that's sectional harmony. That's close position, 4-part voicing, where everything's moving in parallel, and that's a specific idiom for jazz music, for jazz orchestral writing. But in a symphony orchestra, you want, yeah, unless you want to do humorous, comical music, or highly dissonant music in Bela Bartok, but then it's not tonal music, then it's atonal music, and you would find a pitch that you could label as a sharp 11 in a diatonic interpretation, but that's not the case because he's working in an atonal context most of the time.
Okay.
So there is not a standard rule for voicing 1, 3, 5 in orchestra. It would become boring. And by the way, if there were only one standard option, you wouldn't be able to discern a Tchaikovsky from a Ravel
Mm-hmm.
or Rimsky-Korsakov from Richard Strauss, because that's what makes them unique. Well, that's one of the aspects which makes a composer unique and easily recognizable for us humans who are carefully listening, when we are
Mm-hmm.
carefully listening.
Yeah, for sure.
So that was an evading answer. I didn't answer the question. You asked for a solution. I didn't give you a solution. I gave you alternatives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, pretty cool. So I haven't made it to I think the book after the theory of rhythm is the theory of melody.
Pitch scales.
It pick scales, okay. And that's a kaleidoscope. I think he has a book called Kaleidoscope that talks about, or Kaleidophone. So
Yeah.
are the same principles in the rhythm, you know, um used in the pitch scales? Like is he
Yeah.
using the same resultants?
Yes, and that's why there is analogies, and that's one of the reasons why every student somehow must, if he or she is interested in the Schillinger system, you should start with the theory of rhythm. Even you don't like the rhythms or you're never going to use them, well, there are interesting rhythms and interesting tricks to do with rhythm. But the fundamental principles, and that's all these number series, which when you're talking about the theory of rhythm, all these numbers represent attack duration series. They are in the time domain, but you can use the same type of number series in the pitch domain. And that's where they return in the book number 2, the theory of pitch scales, where he has explained 4 families of pitch scales. And of course, the first group is the classical diatonic 5 or 7 pitch
Mm-hmm.
scale, but he generalizes that into 3 pitch scales, 4 pitch scales, 6 pitch scales, etc. And then there is the standard generalization approach in Schillinger. So he presents all options for scales, whether they have been used in history frequently or not, but he does the generalization, and then he does the development of pitch scales. And then you get the same combination or permutation principles that you learned in book 1, the theory of rhythm. So yes, the same aspects, the same approaches return in the theory of pitch scale. And the same things will later return when you mentioned the theory of melody, which comes after that.
Mm-hmm.
And the same principles return in the theory of harmony. So that's why it makes sense to start with book one. No need to study all of that, but understand the basic techniques or principles at work there and see how they are also used in other musical domains like the pitch domain, melody domain, harmony.
Okay. How long did it take you to get through those books? Because the first one is already pretty. It's already pretty
Well,
intense with
it,
information.
it's iterative. I did a first run, but because it's two volumes, I think it's 1600 pages.
Hmm.
I can't remember, it's long ago, but I guess I must have spent half a year to a year. And of course, not fully understanding it. But then, okay, then, uh, then you become interested. Oh, like, I want to do, I want to understand his approach to harmony better. So you go back to book five, the special theory of harmony,
Hmm.
and go deeper into that, reread it. And again, all my books are for all examples because there are hardly any comments in his examples. They illustrate. Well, you have the book, so you know that. When he talks diatonic root cycles, he has various examples of root cycles with R3,
Hmm.
the leap down by a third of the root. Then root 5, then root 7, then combinations R3 plus R5, R3 plus R7, etc. Um, but then those will become later four-part voice leading examples. But then there is no extra notation. You only get the four parts on two staves on the grand staff. And my book is full of annotations. Which chordal function was doubled here? Is there contrary motion or not? Etc. etc. So that's when I went through the second iteration of studying the books, parts
Hmm.
of the books. And of course, over the years, I went through the books, I guess 3 or 4 times. And when I'm preparing a tutorial for YouTube, I again go back into a chapter of one of the books and study it very deeply. And of course, yeah, and then I start to create my own examples in that style or illustrating that technique. So it's not a single run from front page to page 1600 and you're done.
Yeah.
No, no, use them as a toolbox. Keep rereading. And also, at some point, everybody's free to reject certain chapters or sections from chapters. Like, oh, I don't like this idiom, or it is nonsense. Because there are also he does some claims about style development or lacking skills of classical composers. There are moments where he is correcting Johann Sebastian Bach or
Yeah.
Maurice Ravel.
Yeah, I
I
saw
don't know
that.
if you read those pages, but oh my God! Now it's because everybody forgot Schillinger, but nobody has ever forgotten Stravinsky or Ravel. So those claims, I'd rather tear those pages out from the book. But so there's no need to try and remember everything and or believe everything or support everything that's written there. Pick from the books what you think is useful for your development.
Hmm. Yeah,
And
I
of
think that
course,
was
yeah, this
17.
also these books and his lessons date back to the time of radio music and the beginning of TV music. So that means rapid production of music. And of course, if you work for the radio, you have to be able as a composer to write every style, and then produce, I don't know, 30 minutes of music every week. Uh, of course, these days, low budget films and commercials are the same thing, but in those days, it was radio music in a far more modern idiom than most of the commercial and epic music you hear. Well, also, I shouldn't make any judgment about epic music in Hollywood, but in any case, a lot of music had to be written for all these radio stations, national or local radio. So all these composers, well, there was a whole school of composers who studied with Schillinger then in order to have this scientific approach and write fast, write quickly, get your job done before the end of the week when the musicians would go or live on radio, etc.
Mhm.
Okay, that's
So,
historical.
yeah, why do you think he was forgotten about or isn't as widely discussed by composers? Was it because of the math is intimidating or things like that, or maybe too cocky or arrogant?
Yeah, I guess you're right. Right in both aspects you mentioned. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The arrogance part, I shouldn't have done it. Or maybe he wasn't. I have never met him. I never met one of his pupils. Only I have the what I know, what I read online, and the little fragments that are appeared as footnotes in the book. Um, yeah, and of course his compositions didn't survive. Nobody's playing them. I think
Yep.
occasionally you find a YouTube movie where a sonata of his is being performed, or a piece for theremin, or a melody. Um, yeah, and the mathematical notation, of course, is also not very attractive for beginning students. If the only thing you can read is a piano roll in a digital audio workstation, then the Schillinger book is like a cold shower.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Pretty
it
cool.
doesn't, and it's not. I mean, the layout of this books, it's not very attractive in the 21st century. It's just a reprint of manuscripts that were produced in the 1940s. It's almost 100 years old. It's not meant. It's not a commercial book print. So there's a whole range of reasons why people don't want or don't want to study it or don't like it.
Mhm.
I know, and there's always some sort of controversy. I read online of people, everything that Schillinger does, bullshit, nonsense,
Yeah.
doesn't make any sense. Yeah, it's fine with me. I, uh, um, for me, there were elements in it that were valuable, that were useful, and I think it still deserves some attention. That's why I'm doing my best on YouTube to keep spreading the news. And
Hmm.
there's a few other people who are doing the same thing.
Yeah, for
But
sure.
they helped me. They helped me. They did.
Hmm. So as a new composer coming in, this is sort of a two-part question. If you can start over with learning music composition and also to a new young composer coming up, how would you study and what materials would you get and which resources would you use? How would you structure a system for yourself to learn composition?
Um, that's a really hard question. Um, because you mentioned it at the beginning. I also have an education background, but it's more in science. And I've designed curricula for academic accreditation. Um, and of course, then as a group of teachers or professors or lecturers, you do your best to get a coherent curriculum with overall design lines, learning objects, etc. But still, every student you meet has is an individual person, and he or she has a method for him or herself that works best. And as a teacher, you should try and find what suits the student. And for some, it works when I tell them exactly what to do. I would read a chapter aloud and point at a blackboard or whiteboard, this formula, or you see this melody, it's going there. And they would take notes and, oh yeah, 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 I see it. And the other student, well, boring guy, he's just reading from everything that's in the book, I can do it by myself. Yeah, but that's fine as well. Then you have a student who prefers to do independent studies, but then should use the opportunity in case he or she doesn't understand the thing to ask the lecturer, to ask a teacher, and hope that that person has more experience, can explain things in other ways, alternative ways, and get the knowledge across. But oh yeah, so there is not one optimal teaching method. There's so many ways of learning things. Resources, yeah. Who can
Mhm.
compete with the internet these days?
Yeah.
Nobody. There's no university, no college of music. Nobody can compete with YouTube or the web. Um, there, the clever trick remains to do filtering and not to lose focus as a student. But everything is there, and it's easy to get books these days if you still want to read from books. But of course, there's the multimedia, there's audio, there's video, there's animations, there's graphics, there's everything, everything. And the scores, the classical scores, since, well, if a composer has died more than 70 years ago, copyright is over. So
Hmm.
all the scores from the classic, not all, but well, everything until 1950. A composer who died before 1950, um, my
Look,
video, where's my
yeah,
camera? That's
it
the
looks like
camera.
we got disconnected there. Apologies for that.
No,
So,
but I remember where we left off. You were asking for resources.
so
I
the last thing
mentioned
I heard was
everything.
copyright laws 70 years ago.
Exactly. I
Yeah.
mentioned everything that's online, but also uh, there's so much music now in the public domain since copyright right has expired 70 years after their death. So I still buy hard copies of the scores, but you can download everything from the internet, even the MIDI files. If you want to study Mozart's 40th of the Jupiter Symphony 41, get the score, get the MIDI. There's YouTube videos where professors or very experienced people explain you exactly what's in that music. There's so many resources.
Yeah. A lot of pretty cool stuff out there. So yeah, thank you. Thanks for all the information. Thanks for spreading the word on the Schillinger system. And I really enjoy your YouTube channel and the things you talk about with the design and science based on music.
But, but you think that, yeah, so you watched these tutorials. I do get comments, and I have online students.
Hmm.
Um, what do you think about the level? But it's a niche. It's a niche channel.
Hmm.
You
Yeah,
say
definitely. Yeah.
niche channel. That's what you're
Yeah,
saying.
niche. Yeah. It definitely is. I've always been interested in more of design, like the art versus design thing. I like design a lot. And it was cool to come across like well designed sounding music. Like I can almost tell right away when someone uses Schillinger system
Yeah.
for music. Like for instance, I was watching the Ella Fitzgerald documentary and they were talking about the song she has Chew 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 Your Bubblegum.
Okay. Yeah. And
And I could tell right away that it was that Schillinger was used for it. So I researched, I did the research for it, and it was her drummer, which was a Chick Webb, and then the third guy, Bud. I want to say, let me see. I'm going blank right now. Let me get it for you.
but no, yeah, but
Yeah,
you're right.
Buck Ram. That was his name. So
You're you're, you're right. If those were songs that she performed in the 1950s, it's not unlikely that composers or arrangers were familiar with the system.
mhm.
And of course, that's also when it was still used at the Berkeley College of Music.
Yeah, Schillinger's house before.
Before there was the split and the argument about whose intellectual property. But yeah, it's not unlikely.
Mhm.
And of course, the other famous example is George Gershwin.
Yeah, Gershwin. Also, Glenn Miller.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a certain organization it has. It's normally pretty organized. There's like nothing overlapping.
Mm.
So it's like a dun 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 and then dun 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 dun. It's like two different.
But
It's like a certain organization that
it's
happens.
great, and that's a great if you are capable of immediately recognizing whether something was composed with a Schillinger approach. I'm not sure I could do that, but then
It's
you
pretty
check
cool.
you got confirmation that it was the case there.
Mm-hmm. Also, yeah, Glenn Miller. Tell right away. There was a movie I was watching, Last Tango in Paris, I think it was called, and there was a song on there. And the guy's his name was Gato Barb.
Gato Barbieri,
Yeah, that's his name. Yeah, Barbieri. And yeah,
he's Brazilian saxophone player.
mm-hmm.
Very
So
rough sound, always playing fortissimo.
yeah, so he composed the music for the movie, and right away I can tell that he used some Schillinger in
Did you
there.
check?
I checked. Yeah, he was also a Schillinger guy.
Yeah, I didn't know
Yeah.
that.
So yeah, pretty
Wow.
interesting. Yeah. So that's what had me and most of the songs I really like, once I researched it, I found out they were Schillinger guys, Quincy Jones, Schillinger guy.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I never ever read a link between Quincy Jones because he went to Paris to Nadia Boulanger.
Mhm.
He also studied the Schillinger system, or no, not with Schillinger. That's very. Or did
I'm
he?
not
Tell me.
yeah, I'm not sure if it was with Schillinger, but I know he definitely did study the Schillinger system.
He did. Oh,
Hmm.
yeah, because there's also because he's part of a community from the U.S. Um, who were very familiar with jazz and popular music, but also wanted to study serious classical music. And they all went to Paris, to Nadia Boulanger. There's two sisters, Lily and Nadia. Lily was a musician, a composer,
Hmm.
and she was a theoretician who had a private school where people would come and study. And Quincy Jones went there during his years in Europe. Oh, but
Yeah.
thank you. I didn't know that. I learned something tonight from you.
Yeah, I learned a lot also from you. So yeah, pretty cool stuff. So yeah, that's why I like your channel a lot, and why I like design and math and music.
Yeah?
Oh yeah. Yeah,
You don't
definitely
think it
definitely.
does make music cold because some people scare away when there is mathematics involved. You don't
Yeah, not
know
for me. Not at all. Yeah, it's really, really cool.
because at some point, because mathematics in music uh, implies or suggests that there is rigidity, that you have a strict algorithm. But if you do that, that would make music completely predictable, right? And at some point, you have to cut the deterministic approach and take a different road to
Mhm.
create something unexpected. And of course, there's mathematical theories which include random behavior or um, self-oscillating or self-scaling patterns, etc.
Mhm.
Um, but in general, mathematical algorithms suggest there's something very predictable going on, and that would make music boring. You don't think so?
No, I don't think so at all. I like mathematics and art, like Fibonacci stuff, or like just well designed. I'm sort of a freak with like the lines being perfect and straight and perfectly centered.
No, not perfectly centered. That's
Yeah.
Fibonacci. That's because the limit of Fibonacci numbers going to infinity will lead you to the golden ratio,
Mhm.
which is the balanced ratio in natural design, which is never the middle. That's because that's another theory that the climax in a somewhat longer movement in classical music should lie in the time domain at the point where the golden section is at 67%, almost two-thirds along the length. That's where you should have your climax and then decrease to the end. That's another hypothesis in music. People have been looking for Fibonacci series in Bach, longer works by Johann Sebastian Bach, etc.
Yeah, Schillinger had a little Fibonacci. I think it was chapter 6. It was either chapter 5 or 6. It was after the grouping by pairs chapter or before. I'm not mistaken.
Now I know it returns when he talks about the evolution of rhythm. He has all this time all sorts of series, like summation series,
Mm-hmm.
like the 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 4, 8, 1, 3, 5, 7, 1, 3, 8, etc. And in those set of options, that's why he mentions the Fibonacci series, the natural growth. Yes, and it does appear earlier. No, that's a later book because he has
Mm-hmm.
this. There's a few image photographs in the book. There's the one of the shell or the fern, and those growth patterns or the line patterns also are in agreement with the Fibonacci series, the numbers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see it now. It's chapter 6 where he introduces the grouping by 3 or more generators.
Mm.
Yeah, so you're pretty cool. Well, yeah. Well, yeah, thank you for everything. Thanks for all the information and thanks for coming on the Trillionaire meeting.
Thanks for having me. It was great talking to you, and we'll
Mhm.
we'll be in touch somehow.
It would definitely be in touch. And you have any closing remarks? Anything you would like to say?
No, I'm honored. This is the yeah, because I said it's a niche activity. It's a very limited group of people interested in Schillinger system. I put a lot of work into creating these tutorials, and people like you seem to appreciate them and seem to notice them. That's a great compliment, and thank you for that.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll be sure to leave the links in the description for everyone else to check out.
Thank
Also,
you.
please buy his books and everything on the internet. I have 2 of them now. And yeah, they're pretty informative. They help me to better understand some of the chapters in the Schillinger book. Uh, you know, broke it down a little better. He used a little different notation. Was that because of copyright, like different
Oh,
symbols and
no,
everything? Was that
no, you are referring to his use of this graph paper,
mm-hmm.
right?
Oh, no, I'm
Uh,
referring to symbols. Like
oh, symbol.
instead of
Yeah,
PLI and PLA, he used different.
yeah, because sometimes there's inconsistent notation.
Mm-hmm.
Also, for things like root cycles, he uses the symbol C, which is also the name of a pitch. So for a root cycle, I use the letter R, which is not the pitch name. Um, Chord structure, he also calls C a chord. Yeah, again, the letter C, which is a pitch name. So I use harmony H or chord structure S, because those are not note names. So that's where I introduce a different notation.
Okay.
And where he notates the rhythms on graph paper. But that's also in those days when you want to buy scientific paper, you would get this millimeter lines. And of course, drawing a graph on that type of paper was easy to do.
Mm-hmm.
These days, you would use other methods. So I'm using computer diagrams.
Okay.
So yes, I illustrate a lot of his examples with different, usually 3 notations. One graphical, one with numbers, and one in staff notation, in order to help the student to overcome the difficulties reading the mathematical notation. I'm trying to help.
For sure, and appreciate it. Well, yeah, cheers. Well, yeah, thank
Yeah,
you. Thanks for everything.
you're welcome. See you. Bye bye.
All right, have a good one.